Good morning and welcome to Feefo and Fountain's retail webinar. I'm sure a lot of you are here today because you've all had the same message: adapt, evolve and embrace new technology. Now, this is the solution constantly being drummed into retailers who are being told that they need to do this in order to keep up with fast-paced and ever-changing consumer demands. But what does this really mean and how easy is it to do this? Our speakers today are going to spend the next 60 minutes sharing with you the most cutting-edge techniques that they use to help their retail clients to stay ahead of the curve and drive digital revenue. These will also help you to stand out, take market share, and most importantly, increase customer profit and lifetime value. My name is Rachel Murray, and I'm Head of Partnerships at Fountain, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. I'd also like to introduce you to our two speakers. Keith Povey is Director of Marketing at Feefo, the renowned customer review and insights provider. Feefo are well-versed in connecting retailers with their customers, and Keith will be discussing how to leverage customer insights in order to build a better digital experience. Our second speaker is David Cooper, who is Marketing Manager at Fountain, a global award-winning digital marketing agency who have a proven success record in driving online growth for the retail sector. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Keith to share his insights. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Rachel. Morning, everybody. Just what everybody wanted in the morning, some PowerPoint slides. I promise you I've kept them short. And as Rachel said, Feefo, particularly in the market of customer intelligence, customer data, customer feedback, we gather so much, we see so much. So the opportunity like this to share those kind of insights is always really, really welcome. So you guys can all see my slides. If I move to the next slide, technical check up front. Has that moved?
It has.
Okay, awesome. So I don't think I need to tell anybody that's taken the trouble to listen to this webinar that stuff happened this year that made consumer attitudes and digital consumption just exponentially increase, exponentially change overnight. And what we saw was some huge spikes and some huge movements in movement to online consumptions. And that's across multiple verticals that we can see across our customer set. But we also saw that those numbers were maintained and stayed at very high levels. We've seen post the pandemic and post lockdown, we've seen stats that have implied that 1 in 2 customers will see themselves increasing the way they shop online now and in the future. And nearly 1 in 2, 44%, have said that they don't think that they'll go back to the old way that they were shopping. When you consider what that really means and the heritage of the British high street and the heritage of British retail, that's a sea change that I'm sure the big boys and girls, the big brands are all listening. And if they're not, then happy to share those statistics that we see and the sentiments and the trends that we can pull out of our hub. But overall, this is an indication of, a sea change, and to be ready for that, you have to be aware of both the opportunities and the threats that seismic movement presents to us. On one level, it's fantastic if you're geared up to capture this kind of transformation, and at the same time, it's going to highlight for retailers all over the world if they were less than ready for this movement. Here you can see some of the spikes that we were talking about. We saw some interesting dips as well, including, from what we can tell, a basic shunning of going online around the same time that the full lockdown was announced in the UK, which was quite interesting. Nobody wanted to buy anything at that point, apart from probably food and toilet roll, as we all know. But then if you run a line of best fit through that graph and upwards and onwards into the months that we're seeing now, that the consumption online has just gone up and up to the point where we saw it go above just prior to Black Friday, and it stayed there. And that's pretty incredible. If you're a retailer that is seeing huge spikes to the traffic reaching your website, if you're not capturing that, if you're not seeing that in the most efficient way, you're losing opportunity. And I'll keep coming back to that, Rachel and David, the whole way through this, is that if your strategy for how you deal with this digital consumption increase and the increased importance of customer experience, then you're losing money. And I don't think there's a retailer in the world at the moment that can afford to knowingly do that. What we've seen is the traditional retailers that were traditionally reliant on, physical contact, human feedback loops, human actions in store. There are some that have geared themselves up to shift those paradigms straight into digital and done very well with it. But there are some that really haven't, and that brings us to the threat part. When I talk about retailers, I think I'm talking about particularly the ones that have grown up with a physical presence and a physical in-store presence as a part of their initial go-to-market. I'm not going to drop names. We can all guess which retailers I mean, but the ones where stores were incredibly important to them, where we've seen the retailers that have really kicked on and benefited from the changes that we've seen in the last 6-7 months. They grew up with a hybrid strategy. They grew up, if they had an in-store presence, it wasn't the be all and end all, and digital was just as important, if not more. And then you've got the solely online retailers. And of course, I'm going to go into how that affected customer experience and how we viewed customers and how we understand what customers think and feel and want. But I'd be doing them a disservice if I didn't mention, there's supply chains in there, there's inventory management, there's being geared up at high volumes to get stocks and goods to your customers in a timely fashion. There's websites that can cope with, multiples of demand, tens, hundreds, 1,000 times more traffic than you've ever had before. The sites that struggled with dealing with that and subsequently had negative impact on this customer experience were the ones where they were retailers where digital was effectively an adjunct to what they did, whereas the companies that have grown up solely dealing in digital, they had infrastructure, supply chain operations that were geared up for huge spikes, huge spikes. I'm going to touch more on the traditional bricks and mortar retailers, because the analogy actually when we were doing a brief to kind of build out this deck that came about was traditional retailers had two eyes on their market, and they were wholly different eyes. They had in-store, where they had footfall measures, they had ways and means of monitoring where you went in store. So if you go into a major supermarket or a major retailer and your phone has ever added that Wi-Fi network, it's tracking where you are in the store by the access point of Wi-Fi that you join. So if you're at one end of a food hall or the middle of a food hall or the end of a food hall, it's starting to understand where you are, how long you spend time there, roughly what goods you're spending time looking at, all of those things. If you imagine now those and the interactions at till and the brand messages, and there's some very traditional retailers that are incredibly good at reaffirming their brand values at the point where you buy and at the point where you ask for help and at the point where you want someone to show you where something is on a shelf. They are all mechanisms for them to elevate their customer experience. They are all mechanisms for them to understand, even on a store-by-store basis or a regional basis, how their customers feel about this price of a wine or that price of a shirt or this merchandise display of the new trainers and or football kits or any of those things. I'm trying really hard not to pick on any one particular subsection of retail, but all of those feedback loops got turned off in March, and they lost. And I know it's a fairly stark analogy, but they lost an eye, and suddenly they only had a kind of slightly blurry adjunct of an eye to see everything. And that really compounded the retailers that weren't ready for that shift. I think retailers kind of acknowledged with the demise of some really big high street stalwarts in the last decade that a move to online is inevitable and happening. But what happened in March is someone just put an accelerator on that, like, beyond anyone's wildest imagination. And subsequently, those digital strategies, and more importantly, their customer experience strategies, were put massively under a microscope instantaneously. And subsequently, it isn't a technical fault. This is the view that they currently have of their customers. If they haven't begun to grow a customer experience, a customer-based business intelligence strategy, this is what they can currently see of their customers. They are trying to sell in the dark. And I probably go back to that traditional shop floor story. Imagine your customer is entering your shop and you cannot see them. They can see what's just directly in front of them. They know where they're going. They know how to find it. But you are stood behind a till, unaware of who's in your shop, what they're picking up, what they're putting back, what they're turning their nose up at, what they're bringing to the till, until they do. And then they put it in their car and they buy it and they walk away. And it's effectively, it's selling in the absolute pitch black if you don't have a customer experience strategy in place, a CX strategy in place. Or I did use the analogy of basically being Sandra Bullock in Bird Box, that Netflix film, but we were worried about copyright, so we didn't put that picture in. So once you engage a CX strategy, once you begin to put in mechanisms, even at the very base level, of starting to understand what it is your customer bought, what they thought of it, what they thought of the experience to get them to that purchase, and what they think will drive them to make repeat purchases, you are starting to build up a data set. Now, I'm conscious, and I've made the notes on this, that talking about data can sometimes be alienating, particularly for people that are just starting their businesses. And hopefully this webinar is as relevant to, small and medium businesses as it is to medium mid-market and enterprise. But across the board, you're building a data set. And so don't be scared of that phrase, because what you're effectively doing when I say data is you have got digital records of exactly how your customer feels. And Feefo, particularly, like I'm brand new to Feefo. It's no secret. I've been here for a couple of months now. The breadth of what our customers can see about their customers is incredible. Like, we've got tools that will let you drill down by particular data sets, particular keywords across reviews. We've got AI tools that let you see the actual sentiment of your customer base at scale. But when you think about how useful that is and what that's actually for, it means that the lights in your shop are now on, and you can see what your customers are picking up, and you can see what they're turning their nose up at, and you can see what they're grinning ear to ear about, and you can see the look on their face when they're putting the clothes on your till, and you can see exactly why they're buying it, and you're actually engaging with them at the till point and they're walking away, and now you're doing that digitally. Having a CX strategy, that's what it means in its simplest terms, is seeing and understanding your customer. So, if I use phrases like data sets and business intelligence, at its core, it doesn't matter if you're just starting out making some fantastic artisan handmade face masks, or you're selling huge, vast quantities of units of a certain car. Across the board, every retailer in the world now wants to very clearly see exactly what their customer wants, needs, and thinks. And a CX strategy is the way to do that. Out of the dark, onto a bright slide. Compliments to the designer on that one. So here you can see how new customer experience breaks down. There's data to be had all the way across that chain. I'm not going to overly labor the point, but here you've got, say, for instance, 3 examples. In terms of sales interaction and how we sell, you should be asking questions about how that felt. Was it good? How do you rate that? Delivery, I mean, it's a huge factor in online. You could be doing all the work up front, and if your supply chain or your delivery charges are too high or too long, if you don't know those things, you will continue to give some sort of dissatisfying service to your customers, and you will just compound the problem. You need those feedback loops to continually improve. Returns the same. Of course, I would naturally oversimplify it all. It does bring challenges, but the truth of the matter is there are thousands and thousands of customers. We have thousands of customers on our Feefo platform that are doing different degrees of this currently. And you've got on one hand, you've got lost information. We've got lost feedback loops, lost ability to engage with customers. So all we are doing is building out a way to now either replace those or augment what was already there. So we've seen stats in line with the fact that 97% of customers read online reviews before making a purchase. Now, some of them are conscious. So for instance, I know that if I was to buy an Airbnb, before I book it, I'm going to sit and read the reviews. Or if I'm going to book a golf course, I'm going to go and see what people think of it. But likewise, what we've seen with some of the tools and widgets that we give our customers to implement on their website, sometimes it's a subliminal thing, and seeing, a retailer that's been getting 4.6, 4.5, 5 stars out of 5, it adds to that digital experience, and it brings that reassurance behind it. So reviews are very much a part of an online retail experience. And then from a report in Deloitte, we found a stat that showed that customer-centric companies stand to make 60% more profit on the profit that they already make, just validate that, than those that are not customer-centric. So I think the days of not being customer-centric are probably, as a sensible strategy, are probably long gone. I'm sure someone will point out a very niche example to prove me wrong on that one, but I cannot imagine now, particularly a digital organization that does not align what it delivers and sells and its messaging with exactly what its customer wants to consume. I just think it makes perfect sense. So the challenges that you face then in this new age of retail: how do you build brand loyalty when you can no longer see your customers? Well, you can no longer see your customers in the way that maybe you did, or you can no longer, if you're not trying to see your customers, maybe you should be. But there are means of building up brand loyalty: showing interaction, understanding them, listening to feedback, responding to comments, giving yourself and the customer the opportunity to have a better experience. So if a customer is dissatisfied with X, you coming in, seeing that review, engaging with that customer, finding out more about what the problem is, and taking steps to remedy it, protects the brand that you have worked so hard to build. Whether you're a multi-billion-dollar business or you're 3 months into starting your new business, that brand belongs to you. And customer experience, customer feedback loops, CX strategies give you the ability to protect that brand. How can you stay connected? Those kind of interactions all make sense. Sending out surveys at various points in that digital experience gives you the opportunity to take temperatures of how it's going, and it should then throw up data points that you begin to shape your go-to-market with. And when I say go-to-market, to demystify, some jargon I might be guilty of, when you're going out to your customers and you're trying to get them to buy from you, have you got data that tells you that's exactly the right way to do it? Or should you be listening to that data and changing something? And on the basis, on the basics at the bottom, how do you know what they like and don't like? The move online, as I've said already, shines some pretty strong lights on exactly where gaps might have been in your CX experience. You need to be mature enough to listen and take a step back, be a little bit objective, understand what it is your customers are trying to tell you, and then move forward with that as an action. A little stat for you, because I don't want to over talk, but customer-based business intelligence, feedback, CX, however you want to phrase it, influenced sales by 23 billion in the UK alone. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that's come from the CMA. I'm sure other people would come up with different totals. But when you think that in some way, shape or form, 23 billion pounds worth of transactions have been in some way influenced by customer feedback, customer understanding, customer experience, customer-based business intelligence, all of those things, that's huge. And it underlines what I was saying at the top, David and Rachel, that if you aren't increasing your customer experience stance, if you're not beginning to think of it as a very serious part of what you do on a day-by-day basis, you are going to be leaving money on the table. And someone else who is doing that is probably more likely to take that money from that customer. So I'll whiz through these because I don't want to overstay my welcome, and I want to make sure I leave you some time as well, David. One, you need to understand your new customer. You need to implement ways and means to do that. At the very base level, our core offering at Feefo, for example, ratings, reviews, stars. Being able to give your customer the ability to tell you how they felt and what they experienced is absolutely, as a bare minimum, what every kind of retailer with a digital footprint should be doing. You need to hear what they think. But then when you start to build that up at scale and you've collected 10 reviews, 100 reviews, 1,000 reviews, you need the ability to drill down on that. I mean, there's a famous phrase of, I had so much sales, I didn't know what to do with it, but that's a nice problem to have. I think that's one of the biggest fallacies in business. It's not a nice problem to have. You're doing it wrong. If you've got so many sales and then subsequently so much feedback that you don't know what to do with it, you need to take steps, because that is all information that's going to refine the way you deal with those customers and fundamentally, without sounding too crass, make more money. That's why Feefo have built tools like performance profiling, which uses AI to begin to kind of pull out themes, keywords, recurring topics. We've got tools that let you see sentiment. We've got dashboards that let you see 1,000 reviews and exactly what that really means. You can drill down into that data. It's really important. It's really, really important, because if you're trying to engage with each data point one by one, you'll miss what the overarching message of that data really is. And lastly, you need to be ready to act. So I've said, you should be collecting this data, then you should be looking at this data, and all of that is almost pointless if you aren't ready to do something about it. So when we say customer-based business intelligence, when you break that phrase down, you are understanding what the customer thinks, and you are providing yourself with intelligence on which you should then act. So you need to be gearing up to, if there's a particular product that is selling particularly well, how do I bring that to the front? If there's a problem with your courier, how do I move to different couriers? Or how do I reduce the cost? Or how do I do these things? All of the whole experience, from searching for your website through to consumption, through to the delivery, through to whatever it is that you delivered was packed or packaged or sent to that person, all of that matters. And you need to be able to flex with what your customer tells you at that point. So to sum up, if digital experience, digital consumption is rising at the rate that it is, and of course, the day we choose to do this webinar, Rachel and David, is the day that we're probably looking at some sort of increased measures from the UK government. We don't know what they are at the time we're recording this, but there's every chance that there's some limitation on movement, or people will be asked to stay in their homes more than they have been recently. And so whatever rise we've seen is likely to start tipping back up again. If you are not aligning your CX strategy to run in parallel with that, you are losing money. And we drew a little graph that demonstrates that. The deficit between customers shopping online and your CX strategy in terms of proportion and importance is lost revenue. The gap between how many people are hitting your website and how important you think CX is lost money. If your CX strategy is in line with the spikes in traffic and engagement that you've seen digitally, then you are doing absolutely everything you can do to optimize that. And yeah, I think that's everything. Customer-based business intelligence is a requirement now particularly for retailers. Ratings and reviews are the bare minimum, but you need to understand broadly what that data is telling you across a number of different areas. And that can be daunting, but with the right provider of those platforms, we've got people here, for instance, that will help you understand those things. And if you need to be listening to your customers and adapting, because if you're not, you're leaving money behind. And that was everything, Rachel.
That's great. Thanks, Keith. Some really interesting insights there. If any of our listeners have any questions for Keith, then please do leave them in the comments box on your screen and I'll read them out at the end. So now I'd like to hand over to David, our marketing manager at Fountain, who's going to be sharing his digital insights with you today.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Cheers. So, as Rachel said, I'm marketing manager at Fountain. We're a digital marketing agency. And so our focus is a lot on how we combine digital marketing with websites and the customer experience importance that Keith was talking about earlier. So to kind of address what's been happening recently with the pandemic and lockdown, I think it's important to go way back. So I want to take you all back to 1983. And on New Year's Day, a lot of people would have been drinking glasses, popping corks, and drinking champagne as they celebrate the new year. But at ARPANET, they did something very different to celebrate. On New Year's Day of 1983, they adopted the network of networks, which was TCP/IP. That created our kind of the foundation of our modern internet. And then if you jump forward 6 years from there to 1989, Tim Berners-Lee then creates the World Wide Web. It's the most accessible form of internet data. And there is a reason why I'm taking you all the way back here. Don't worry, it does circle back. But since all those decades ago, online usership has steadily been increasing from 1 person to over 60% of the world's population. That's over 4.5 billion people. So as you can see, this kind of online migration, as we're calling it, is essentially a long time coming phenomenon. It's not something new. It's not something that has recently happened. It's something that's been happening for the best part of the last 30, 40 years. And what people need to understand is that what COVID-19 has done is just increase this gradient. The rate at which people are moving online, doing things online more, isn't a slow gradient, as this arrow may show. It actually looks more like this. And COVID-19 obviously has forced a lot of people inside, it's forced a lot of people to be online more, but also to purchase online more than ever. And as I say, this is a long time coming. It's not been a recent thing. It's been happening for ages. All it has now is more visibility, which is why people are focusing on it so much more. But why is this so important to us, particularly in the retail sector? Well, I think as most people would agree with me, profit is the single most important aspect to any business in the retail sector, or pretty much any sector for that matter, but we're focusing on retail today. And much more activity from users, customers, is occurring online. So that is really where we're going to see more revenue and more profit. So activity needs to follow suit. And what this also means is not just an increase in digital activity's impact on your margins. it also does mean the adverse effect as well. It means a decrease in impact on your margins from offline activity. Got a nice little poster here to show you how much we all ignore billboards. But the world has changed drastically over the last few months, which means that our methods need to change too if we're going to survive and even thrive in this digital modern world. And traditional methods are becoming outdated. Wouldn't say obsolete, there's still people commuting, there's still people that are going to be commuting in the future. That's going to happen. We all still go outside. I know I do. I go into town every now and then. It doesn't mean that they're completely useless. It just means their effectiveness has decreased. They're not hitting as many people as they can be, but online ads are hitting people more. Online experiences is having a bigger effect with people. And brick and mortar store experience is becoming a smaller thing. And it's something that people really should be looking out for right now. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that has already happened and had quite drastic effects on many businesses. One big example, and I hope there isn't anyone from Primark watching, but if you are, and this is fact, Primark went from having a monthly revenue of £650 million, and that pretty much overnight went to zero, because they didn't have the business model to sustain this new online effect, this new online migration. They didn't have an online store or presence or really a way of connecting with their audiences online in the same way that other businesses do. And what we also know from this is, there's a lot of other smaller businesses out there that have been hit even worse. And, it's meant quite horrible things for businesses, closure even. But the ones that have survived and the ones that have continued to thrive are the ones that do have an online presence. Again, there's great examples of this with, for example, Tesco. Granted, they're massive already, but they recently hired an extra 16,000 people, of which at least 13,000 are completely dedicated to online deliveries, whether that be drivers or store pickers, those kinds of jobs. So clearly there is an emphasis on this, and it is having a bigger impact on businesses. But whether you have a small presence or a big presence, how do you move to this? How do you shift to drive awareness for a brand and product, and then increase your revenue from it in a space where you may not have had that same kind of coverage? I believe the first step to doing this is to identify your online customer journey. And this is everything from, as you can see here, traffic, from how you actually contact them online to how you reach new audiences or existing audiences when they come to your site. What is their experience on your site? Is, as Keith mentioned, are they having a good experience, and is it tailored to new circumstances? And then ultimately, if they're a customer, how do you maintain that loyalty? How do you keep them coming back and repeat purchasing? And, in marketing, we love talking about funnels, but in reality, I don't know if we can give it the name funnel, because if it was, there'd be one way in and one way out, and that'd be to make a purchase. And I think everyone here knows better than I do that conversion rates are not 100%. And that's not saying, we're not good enough. No one's is 100%, not us, not Amazon, not anyone. So if it's not a funnel, I think a better term is, and it sounds ridiculous, but stay with me on this, a colander. And because throughout a colander, there are holes where water escapes, and those are the customers. You don't convert 100% of customers, so they're leaving your funnel at different stages. So what our job really to do when we're looking at digital marketing and when we're looking at customer experience is boil down to two intrinsically linked actions. The first one is to fill that colander with more customers through awareness at the top of the funnel. And then the second action is then to stop losing customers through plugging these holes through performance marketing and maintaining loyalty throughout the funnel. Now, the difficult thing of addressing these before was that, like billboards, you could never truly see the impact. How factually were you supposed to tell which people had seen your billboard and then bought in store? You can't. There's no real way to properly know. It's faith-based marketing. And even if you had surveys on the door, you'd probably get half the people not filling it in, and half the ones that did probably would unknowingly give the wrong answer. But at Fountain, we prefer a more facts-based marketing, because what digital allows us to do is to see this exact impact of every single ad, every single person on sales. It's what we like to call the difference between madmen and mathmen marketing. So there are those who believe that a new big creative idea, as marketing has always been, is going to bring everyone to a site, sell a product, and that may be true. But how do you improve on that? How do you improve on that piece of creative that is getting all this exposure? And that's where the mathmen come in. That's where we look at, right, what about this ad is actually driving people? Let's split test it and see the difference, and then create new creative, new ads and images based on the data that we have. We know that this aspect of an ad sells, so let's focus more on it. So to give you an example of how this all works, let's say we have 3 ads here. They are actually some former ads that we actually use as Fountain. And let's say we have 3 audiences here as well. And with Facebook ads, when a user clicks on one of these ads, we can track it through Google Analytics all the way back to your site. So we can see which users from which audiences are purchasing. We can then also see which ads are driving that and driving those audiences to make those interactions. Ultimately, what this means is that we can identify which audiences and ads are getting the best profits, maybe losing money or flatlining even. So we can measure this, identify, right, in this case, let's move more budget to the audience and ads that are getting us the most revenue and the best profits. So we can maximize our returns. And then for the things that aren't working, test them a bit, see if we can get them up to scratch. And if not, then we can pause them. So ultimately, profit increases. And with the automation that these ad platforms now allow us, we can be incredibly targeted and with even more ease with who we're hitting with these ads. So platforms like Google and LinkedIn, they use data and data points on individuals like us to see how we behave online, and then target people more likely to purchase from you. So Google has billions of data points on everyone, and you can't really escape it. And it can identify things like whether we're more likely to buy jeans, televisions, cars, and like Ethan trying to be a bit kind of out there with everything. But if it is cars, then what type of car? Is it second-hand cars? Is it family? Is it sports cars, luxury cars? It doesn't stop there. As I've got a list here, Google and a lot of other platforms as well can allow us to target by individual interests, demographics, geographical areas. But it's the last 2 on there that I really want to bring your attention to: the affinity to a product and online history. This is where artificial intelligence really comes into the mix and judges us as individuals and our behavior online. And it tries to assess what we're in market to buy and potentially what we will buy next. So it will show us ads from retailers that sell for something we're looking for. If I'm in market for a dining table, it could be that I'm also looking for dining room chairs. I have literally said that because I'm sitting at my dining table on a dining room chair. I'm sure there's a better example out there. But the idea is that it will then see if I then buy the dining room chairs, and then if I do, it clearly knows that the formula is right. If I don't, it knows the formula is wrong in some way and updates it and learns from this. And that's where the artificial intelligence really does come into its own, and to make sure that we are getting the most exact, perfect customers to our site, so that when we're filling the colander at the top, it's high quality traffic. And it's actually people that really want our product, which then lends itself into the customer experience. If they want the product, it's relevant to them. So they're going to go to a site that is actually relevant to what they're looking for. So already you're kind of addressing this element of plugging the hole and increasing that customer experience. And it obviously helps the advertiser as well, in terms of the budget is then only spent on customers that are likely to buy, rather than users that are probably not going to buy as much. And I quite like this as well in terms of using it as a reference with a billboard, because with billboards you just can't choose who you're showing it to, really. I mean, there are certain elements, but ultimately there are going to be a lot of people who that is shown to who aren't in your market. So when we're looking at those first two actions, filling the colander, this is how it's best done online. In terms of ads, this is how we fill the colander with customers through awareness marketing. So already we're stopping some of the hemorrhaging before we've even looked at plugging the holes. So moving on then, how do we plug those holes? How do we keep them in and keep loyalty from these customers as well? There's two main methods that I think are that best do this. And the first is similar to awareness, and it's through ads, but not through new audiences or the ad platform's extensive audience targeting. Instead, what we do is we create very controlled audiences. So based on users that have visited your site before, we can even create audiences based on, where they visited a certain page, the time they spent, a number of pages. We create audiences for all kinds of things. And what you can then do is identify, right, these users have come to this site clearly looking for this product because they look at these pages on our site. So let's show them ads for those types of products. And again, you're making sure that you're keeping the product relevant to the individual, relevant to the audience, so they're getting what they want instead of just randomly selling anything to them. And then they're being sent to a page that matches that. So you're making sure they've got the best experience in terms of identifying what they are looking for and also where you send them to. I mean, an example of this is if you sent people to a website that sells cars again, and they only look for BMWs, you're probably going to want to then just show them BMWs. They're not looking for Hondas. The Honda people are looking for Hondas, so show them those ads. And we do it ourselves. It's a really, really good way of making sure that you're keeping as relevant to the right people as possible. And one thing that, we love throwing this number out there because people don't actually realize how long you can do this for. But there's a big blue blob in the middle of that page, which basically you can show these ads, these remarketing ads, to any user that comes to your site for 540 days. And every time they come back to your site, that ticker resets. So you can keep in a lot of users' heads for quite a long time, so that if it's a more high ticket item, if it is something that has a longer purchase period, then you can keep staying front of mind. So when they make that decision to purchase, you're there for them. You've already told them what the product is, what it does, how it helps them, and then you've offered that to them in a really easy way. So again, you're combining these elements of digital marketing and customer experience. I'm sure we've all kind of experienced when you were looking for tennis gear and suddenly loads of tennis rackets started following you around the web. And that is a year and a half that you can keep in contact with someone, as opposed to just a second as they walk by a billboard. So that's the first method of plugging the holes. And the second one, and I think it's, in my opinion, the most underrated service that a lot of marketers offer, and many don't even offer it, but it's actually the one we see the most traction from. And that's conversion rate optimization, CRO. And it's not a new area of digital marketing by any means, but it is definitely understated. And it doesn't look at ads at all. What this does is look at your site and focus on your website and the ability of the site to actually drive sales. So what we do is use is use platforms like Hotjar and Mouseflow, which allow us to see how users are behaving online, whether it's just moving their cursors around, clicking on certain things, and maybe they're avoiding certain bits of the site, to help us come up with theories saying, right, there's a lot of people moving their cursors to the middle of this page, but there's no buy now button there. So let's add one and let's see if sales increase. And we'll test that and see if it does. We can, look at things like heat maps to show how far people are scrolling down. So if you've got the buy now button at the bottom of the page and people aren't scrolling that far, that might be why purchases are low. And what this can do as well is identify how users interact with your site. So maybe you're tripping customers up by having a really complicated system of different pages that you need to go through to get to the checkout page. Or perhaps it's just a nightmare to navigate to get to the right product. And this can help you identify how can you make your site more user-friendly and better for the user experience. And I think this links back with what you were saying, Keith, about that then builds loyalty. If people like the site, if they really do, can navigate and can buy what they want, what they're looking for, then they're going to come back to you. I think one of the greatest examples of Crow is on what I consider to be the greatest retail website of all time, and that is Amazon. So I've got some pictures here of their website, and this is from 10 years ago. This is from March 2010, and it very much looks like a website of the time, doesn't it? It's a little bit dated. But then when you compare that to March this year, 2020, and it's so sleek. Clearly, I was looking for Mother's Day gifts at the time when I took this screenshot. It was back in March, I think. But the interesting thing about these two screenshots is that they're 10 years apart. They're the same site, but there was no massive overhaul. There was no big overnight UX overhaul. What you're seeing is the culmination of 10 long years of small tweaks, tiny optimizations, slight adjustments, adding up to give us the marvel that is their website today, one of the most visited sites on the planet with an exceptionally high conversion rate. So really, this is how you bring your brand into the new age of retail and really utilize this online migration, which is only going to increase as time goes on by addressing both digital marketing and customer experience together as one. I'm just going to state again, those 2 points you should be looking at. The first one is reaching the right audience online with those awareness ads to negate wasted spend so that you can fill this colander with quality customers. And then using remarketing and especially Crow to increase the revenue from the user base within there to stop leaking of that colander. And if you do both of these, then you should see your profit increase. So that's my bit done. This is a slightly odd picture of me and all the Google Awards we've won, just to show off, but also just to tell you, actually, this is a proven method. It does work. So do link with me and do send me any questions if you have any questions. So Rachel, back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, David. We've actually just had some questions come in for David, so I'm going to read those out first, and then there's been a couple of for Keith while David's been talking. So, David, when building or altering a website, how do you balance customer experience with the site's ability to drive purchases?
Yeah, so I think that's possibly one of the most important things that I talked about, and it is, I guess, Crow is the answer to that, conversion rate optimization, because you've got to be aware of, you're a business, you need to make sales. That's the point of the website. So make sure that when you're looking at heat maps and all the information that you can get from Google Analytics, Hotjar, Mouseflow, that you're identifying how easy is it for customers to make a purchase, because that kind of does both in tandem. It addresses both how they're using the site and their experience of it, with also increasing your purchases. So the other thing as well to bear in mind when you're looking at that is is just generally how are users interacting with the site. Are they going to one page and then coming off immediately? Is there a high bounce rate? Because if that's the case, then it's probably quite a shit site, to be honest. Like, then there's something you need to do to make it better for customers and users. Because ultimately, if it's a bad site, whether you're trying to drive them to make the purchase, if you do also focus on let's just make this a good experience for them, they're going to more likely come back to you and make that purchase.
That's great. Thanks, David. Okay, we've got a couple for Keith now. So Keith, with Black Friday and the holiday shopping rush set to look a lot different this year, how can retailers start using customer insights now to better prepare for the future?
I'd say it's never too late. So Black Friday, we'll be tipping into October soon. Everyone's going to be ramping up to this phenomenon that's come across the Atlantic to us that we can't ignore anymore. And, it's kind of I think it's grown into people's strategies on a retail basis over the last 3 or 4 years. There was a point where it was in the news and it kind of caught some people by surprise and all those kind of things. Now you can guarantee that queues outside of shops and mad rushes and the viral videos that we all enjoy every year, they're not going to happen. Like they're either going to be disbanded and discouraged by security guards off of those retailers' own free will, or they are simply not going to be allowed. So digitally, it is never too late to set up those CX strategies, even from the base level. So if you're not collating ratings and reviews at the moment, go and get it. Just go and get it right now. I know a great company that does that kind of thing. But more to the point, if you are already doing that, now's the time to start understanding where you are in your maturity of that. If you are only capturing ratings and reviews and you've got some sort of alert on there to respond to anything that's below 3 stars and say thank you to anything that's above 4 stars, or however they're managing it, you're missing a trick. You're about to see more volume go through your site. To all of David's points, go through your site. How are you set up to understand who those people are? How are you set up to understand what they want and what they like from a CX point of view? And then how are you set up then to continue talking to them after they leave your site? It's going to be 2020. I'm sure we'd all like to just stop talking about it in its entirety as a year, because it comes with some really negative connotations. But actually, on a positive kind of slant, never have you been most sure that almost all, if not all, of your customers are going to digitally reach out to you in the next 3 months, whether it's for Black Friday or Christmas or the January sales. So where your customers are going to be. Now it's your job to deliver them in the most optimized way, exactly what they want and how they want it. And it's September the 22nd when we recorded this. You've got time to begin putting those things in place, and I would strongly recommend that everybody does.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Keith. I've actually got another one for you, Keith, as we do have a bit more time. You spoke about how what your customers think can make or break your business. With that in mind, how can a retailer start ensuring customer insight becomes a major driving force in how they do business going forward?
I think it comes back to the points of data at scale, assuming that an established retailer is already collecting feedback. Is your feedback mechanisms allowing you to effectively and efficiently see that at scale, see the trends, understand what the sentiment is behind those trends, and then B, act on it. Are you geared up to act on it? It's one thing to have the data, but it's as good as a digital ornament if you aren't using it. You need to understand what it is that you might have. There might be 20 things that you think you need to change between now and Christmas. Okay, so what are the top 5, and how does data inform those changes? How does the shape of your website, how does the choice of courier, to go back to the examples I used before, how are they all influenced by what your customers are already telling you? So it will make or break organizations. Like, I think we're all a bit worried about the furlough scheme ending in October, and I think the next kind of real indicator will be post the biggest period of the retail year, and then subsequent results and feedback that starts to come out of the retail industry as we creep out of January, and probably, once they've closed the book, sort of February, March, April, we're going to start to see the retailers that really got it right and the retailers that didn't. And I would bet my house that the ones that got it right have a really effective CX strategy in place.
Agreed. Okay, guys, I think that is all we've got time for, I'm afraid. So I hope that everyone got something of value out of today's talks. Please do reach out to the speakers on LinkedIn if you've got any further questions, or if you'd like to find out any more information. So we hope to see you again next time. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.